Hello, Kelly. Hello, Leah. Thank you, everyone, for putting your camera on. Let me just.
You're muted upon entry, but feel free to, if you have questions, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But Niall will start the meeting. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I said that. Niall will start this wonderful panel discussion, so much more interesting than any typical meeting. So Niall, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
I'm for sure ready, and I hope that you all are too. So we're going to have a fantastic conversation here, and I'm happy to see we have good numbers. So feel free to engage and write your questions in the chat. But before doing that, I'm going to do a quick land acknowledgement just to pay respect to the people and nations where we are on their lands. So we have a quick video that I'll share, but just before, I would like to start by acknowledging that McGill University is located in Aboriginal territory. I recognize the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation as custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. So here's a quick video. Full screen. Well, thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. So now I'll give Rosalia time to speak. Muted.
Yes, you said muted before I had a chance to unmute myself. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Power Skills. I hope that some of you were in our other sessions today, and I recognize some names. If this is your first event at Power Skills this year or ever, and a welcome for you that is particular, and I hope that you'll come back to our other sessions. My name is Rosalia Felice, and I'm the Manager of Career Advising and Transition Services at McGill University School of Continuing Studies, and I'm happy to co-facilitate this with my colleague Niall Gariepi, who you've already met.
The happiest career advisor. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And we are so happy to see everyone, and we're really thankful for our panelists. And I know this is the end of the day for a lot of them. And for one of them, it's actually very late in the day as she's in Europe, and it is just past 10 p.m. Now, instead of me or Nayo introducing our wonderful panelists, we're going to ask that they introduce themselves, because they could describe themselves in ways that we just can't, because they know about themselves a lot more than we can. They're a lot more interesting than I am, especially after a full day of Power Skills. So without further ado, I'll actually name them and they will introduce themselves. And I see some familiar faces. Nice to see you out there. All right, so let's start with our dean, actually. So nice of her to be here. So it's Dr. Dean Carola-Weil, and she's actually joining us from Germany. And so I'll ask her to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Rosalia. Merci, Nayo. Thank you all for joining in a midsummer, peak of summer Power Skills. I feel humbled because my colleagues really have, they spawned this idea of Power Skills almost on the back of an envelope last year. Thought, well, wouldn't this be a good thing to do? And we had a couple of emails and I said, yeah, it sounds interesting, you know, sure, why not? And then all of a sudden it just blossomed into this amazing event. And we are, so I have to say, as Dean, my primary job is to make sure that my team is able to do and showcase all of their talents as they have been. So congratulations to the team. Great work. My name is Carola-Weil, and as Rosalia said, I'm actually at home in my home country in Germany and in Munich right now, celebrating my mother's 84th birthday and dealing with some family matters after a year and a half of being in lockdown for COVID. So I apologize for not being there on location, as they say. I fell into deaning by accident. I am also a professor of political science, international relations in particular. My first career was in international security and conflict management, and I spent much of my time dodging bombs and bullets and working for equal opportunities for women and individuals who were underrepresented in fields of foreign policy, defense policy, security, and all of the related areas. So you might wonder how I ended up as Dean of Continuing Studies. And I would say it's been a journey over almost 20 years now that brought me into continuing studies and continuing education. And I'm happy to talk about that later, how I got there. But really, my leadership experience and my work experience has emerged from these very distinct areas that I have tried to marry, which is the conflict management side, the practical policy side. I worked in philanthropy for quite a long time, and now in continuing education and higher education, both as a member of the faculty at McGill and, as I said, the proud cheerleader for my gang at the School of Continuing Studies. So thank you very much. I should say I'm relatively new to Montreal. I only arrived 3 years ago from the United States. Most of my career was south of the border in Washington and further south in Africa and Latin America and Asia and many other places. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carola. And yes, she's as Carola said, she definitely does let us fly with our ideas, and she's very supportive of us and of everyone at the School of Continuing Studies. So thank you so much. And thank you for being here at such a late hour again. I'd now like to introduce Maha Abdelhak.
Hi, everyone. I'm so humbled for being invited today as a panelist. So my name is Maha, and I am a STEM leader. So I work in technology. I happen to work in with a product called SAP. My work experiences, I've had about 20 years working in technology. I was one of the only ladies in my program studying IT. I'm aging myself, but I was a visible minority and the only woman in the whole program. I speak 3 languages and have lived in different countries for work and studies. And my background is a little complicated because I have a background in IT, but also in operations management, which I've complemented with e-marketing, and supplemented professionally with business consulting. So this actually allows me to be a translator in really large large projects for large companies to help design the best solutions. So I get paid for talking all day, which is great because I love talking. So over the last years, the last 10 years, I am working for a consulting firm who's a system integrator for whom I help transition from the traditional model of SAP to the SaaS, so more cloud. And I was one of the first 3, or we call ourselves the OGs, the originals, helping the company skill up and build what today is the foundation for our professional services division. I'm a woman that likes to learn continuously. I'm always reading, always listening to something. And above all, I'm also a mother of a lovely 6-year-old who's my pride and joy. And I'm a fierce advocate for protecting communication rights for people who are not able to use their voice and have to use things that are more traditional. I do know some of the people here, and so I want to give a shout out to Kelly Johnson, because she is an inspiration, and she is one of the people who has, who has inspired me to be a stronger voice and an advocate for my own kid.
Thank you so much, Maha. And that leads me to say thank you to Kelly. We love to see speakers from other sessions. She was actually a speaker in a session we just had on EDI, and she was fantastic. And we welcome you at this session. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Sonia Di Malo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Di Malo. That's repeating myself. It's so nice to be here at Power Skills. I was part of that first event last summer, and really it was an exceptional event. And my hat's off to the team at CATS and Rosalia and all the wonderful work that they do. I'm also a proud faculty member at the School of Continuing Studies. And I have to say that the entire community is really an amazing place to help adults continue to learn and grow, and primarily teach in communications and teamwork, and support also other partners of McGill and the School of Continuing Studies. So at the heart, I see myself as a connector, and currently my jam is to support post-secondary students as they figure out what they're going to do with the schools and the studies that they're learning. So I have a wonderful program called Take the Leap that grounds emerging leaders in purpose and prosperity and helps them figure out, okay, so I've taken all these classes, what do I do with this? And really it's about figuring out who you are and what you're passionate about and what your purpose is. These are huge topics, and it's very scary to take time and think about them. And I force them to think about it. So some of them get scared away, but that's okay. I like to scaffold and support, and there's lots of community and peer engagement and support. And so that's currently one of my passions at the moment. And I'm also, I have my own organization, Harvest Performance. And I've also launched another organization during the pandemic to support small business owners to reinvent in a time of crisis and hopefully rebuild after this time of crisis.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And now I'd like to introduce Annie Hébert Lalonde.
Thank you, Rosalia. I'm very, very honored and happy to be here with all these very inspirational women. And thank you, Ross, for inviting me to speak today. So I'm very happy. Annie Hébert Lalonde, and similar to Maha, I do work in technology. I work in SAP as well, so we have a few things in common. I lead our SAP practice in Canada for Accenture. I've been with Accenture for about 15 years, and I've grown in these 15 years very quickly. I joined a little bit like Carola mentioned. I fell into the consulting world a little bit by, not mistake, I want to say, but like pure chance. It wasn't part of my journey initially, but I'm very happy to have come into this in this industry. I have, being a woman in technology, as Maha mentioned earlier, has been quite interesting. Especially in the industries I've been focused on, whether it's mining and minerals, in manufacturing, in industrial, and even today in my leadership role in the SAP practice with some of the ecosystem partners, I'm often one of the only women at the table. So, it's every day you have to work through that, and we'll talk about that a bit later in this panel. On a personal note, I am a very proud mom of 11-year-old twin boys who keep me extremely busy and are very active. So, they're my pride and joy, obviously. And I love being a mother. And I think, all of the fun stuff I learned with them, I get to apply every day in my role at work. So very happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Annie. And to be transparent, I met Annie at our first job out of university. And it's
just a few years ago,
just a few years ago, not very long at all. And it's been incredible and wonderful, and I'm extremely proud to see where Annie has gone. So I'm so happy to have you on our panel today. So thank you to all our panelists. As you can see, our panelists come from different fields and have landed in their current careers from different paths, and maybe their paths were not linear, which we'll get into that. So this is going to be a wonderful panel. With that said, I invite all of you to engage in the chat. If you have questions for the panelists, we'll start by asking them questions, but please put your questions in the chat and or raise your hand. Please feel free to raise your hand also and ask them questions directly. You can ask questions to one or some of them or all of them, depending on what your question is. So feel free to do that and to talk amongst yourselves when issues come up, because this is one of the things we like to see at Power Skills. And Sonia talked about being a connector. That's what we really want this session and every session at Power Skills to be a connecting event. And we see so many examples of that and we love it. So with that being said, Naya, do you want to go ahead and, oh, by the way, vous pouvez poser vos questions en français, on va les traduire, il n'y a aucun problème, ou même on peut répondre en français. Alors, s'il vous plaît, si vous avez des questions en problème, il n'y a aucun problème avec ça. En français.
Même en espagnol, on en a eu beaucoup en espagnol. We had a lot of questions in Spanish this week. Not sure why, but we love it. So,
et pourquoi pas en italien aussi. Donc, n'importe quoi.
Yes.
Alors,
Allemand.
Allemand. Other languages from the panelists?
We'll translate.
That's what I love about Montreal, right? You gather 20 people in a room and you've got probably more languages than you have people. So, Naya, do you want to go ahead with the first question?
Yeah, for sure. Let's go with an easy question to warm everyone. So again, I'll let the panelists decide who wants to start. But as someone who's learned a lot and admire all these amazing panelists, I'm curious to know which leader you admire the most or who helped you become the amazing person you are today. And of course, parents don't count in this question. But you can name books, movies, childhood stories, or anything. Who would like to start? If not, I'll ask Sonia.
Just as I was unmuting, good job. So many great historical people to choose from. I was going to choose my mother, so thank you, Naya, for disqualifying her. But while she continually inspires me, I'll just say a little good word there. But I would choose Mother Teresa as my go-to. And very briefly, I couldn't choose my mother, so I'll choose Mother Teresa. I read her biography, I should say. And I think the thing that inspired me the most was she had lost her faith so many times and felt lost. Felt like she wasn't making a difference. Could you imagine? And despite it all, she kept going. And she found her path, right? And so she continued to inspire others, even when she wasn't feeling very inspirational. And I think that really hit me a lot hard when I read it, and I thought, what? Are you serious? And in our path, as women, but also as human beings, we have so many lows and so many highs. We have to understand that it's a balance. So in the end, those highs and lows, it all equals a balance. And we have to be able to appreciate those lows as well as the highs.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Sonia. Very, very good. I don't know if anyone wants to jump.
I have to say, someone I've recently discovered, maybe in the past 5 years, I was probably under a rock, but Templin Grandin. And she's an activist for neurodiversity and autism rights. She's autistic herself. She is just a fascinating lady who, in the face of adversity, with everything stacked against her, she succeeded and she's, you know, making noise, and she is teaching and coaching and, you know, and teaching people to look differently, look past, you know, what you think you're seeing. And she's an amazing scientist. She's an inspiration as a woman. And, you know, I think she has a fascinating story that I hope she continues sharing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I see Carola said there's a film about it. Yeah, thank you. Carola, would you like to go next?
It's a tough question, actually. I would say, I mean, I've had many mentors, many of whom were men, actually. And one of the things that I've taken away, even in the work that I've done with women's equity and equality, is the importance of bringing others along. And that if we only speak to ourselves and we speak to the converted, as it were, we are in fact not helping ourselves. And so sometimes it's challenging, it causes difficult conversations, is to find mentorship in places where you might least expect it at times. But I would say that one of the most influential people in my life was actually my master's advisor for my first master's degree. And she was, her name was Catherine Kelleher, is Catherine Kelleher, she's still alive. And she was one of the first women to get a PhD from MIT in political science. And she then was, she in fact was one of the co-founders together with me of a group called Women in International Security, which was there to advocate for women in these non-traditional fields. And she just has been a force of nature. She has never let bias stand in her way. And she's actually experienced quite a lot of bias in her years. But she impressed me with both her tenacity, her ability to work inside organizations. So it wasn't necessarily about it was a different kind of revolution. It was not a silent revolution, but it was maybe akin to the Velvet Revolutions. It was about working from the inside out and saying, let's figure out where the weak spots are in the system, where are the systemic barriers that need to be broken down, and let's find ways of helping people who have erected these barriers take them down themselves. And that to me has always been very much a philosophy in all of my work. And so I'm stubborn. I rarely take no for an answer, but I also pick my battles. And there will be times when I will say, you know what, this is either not important enough, or there is a longer road that we have to take in order to get to the end goal that we're looking for. And she's just been a great voice for that approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see clearly. I can see clearly that in you. And thank you, Annie. If you want to go next.
Yes, sure. I was listening to everyone, and I find, I mean, as someone mentioned, I have many mentors or many people that I look up to for different reasons. There's not one person in particular that, you know, it's all about the different people's strengths or how they use their abilities and their skills that I admire so much. My mother, like Sonia, is really my role model for a bunch of reasons. But again, I'll skip that. I have to say that one of the individuals that have impacted my life and my course and my journey as a woman and in my career was, and this is very odd because you wouldn't think necessarily that when I was prior to working at Accenture, I was working for a Canadian clothing retailer. And I had a vendor, this lovely woman who was the head of her medium-sized company who was my supplier. And she ran her business with such grace and such power. And she's the one who came to me and said, Annie, do you think you're doing the best that you can do right now? And how can you help others around you grow with you? And we sat down and had a 6-hour conversation about how better, or what I could bring to the table in a better way. I think she saw potential in me, and it unlocked this view of myself that I'm forever grateful to her for having taken the time and given me her hand. And so for that, to me, that was this really pivotal moment in my life. So for that, I am always grateful. And she's been a continuous support in my life since then.
Annie, I'm just curious, I want to follow up on that. If you hadn't had that conversation and she had kind of intervened and obviously, as you say, saw potential in you, do you think you would have followed a similar path, or do you ever think about that?
I think about it constantly. I mean, honestly, you know, my parents have always been my cheerleaders, but who listens to their parents, right? Like, really, I listen to my kids, and, you know, so the fact that this person that I you know, I was close to, but we had a very professional relationship, and I put her on this pedestal, right? Just because of the way she was, that she took the time and we sat down together a little bit out of the blue, and we had this very heartfelt, heart discussion. Changed me in a way that I'm not sure, maybe I would have eventually come to the realization, but she gave me that nudge that I needed, I think. So
I love that I asked, because sometimes we have what are seemingly daily interactions with people, and sometimes we don't realize to the extent that they will have meaning further down the line. So I found that really fascinating. And we didn't mean to, so if anybody wants to talk about their parents, we certainly mean you couldn't. So if anybody does want to speak about their parents, we didn't mean to have them outlawed from this conversation. It's just, yeah, just to it made you stretch to think of somebody else. So if any of you would like to talk about your parents, now's your chance.
I'll go.
Okay.
I actually, you know, think my father had a lot to do with me following the career, like not necessarily like telling me exactly what I needed to do, but giving me the drive that I needed and making me believe in myself that, you know, I can do it. I can't say I had many role models, female role models that I could look up to as a little girl, you know, to think, okay, you know, this is what I can do. And I actually do remember telling my dad, he would say, oh, when you grow up and I have grandkids, and I say, no, Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to have a PhD. And then he says, well, how about kids? And I said, well, it's one or the other, no? And he says, no, you know, you can have it all. Like, why not aim higher? And, you know, I think that was just very inspirational. I do think that, you know, as a mentor, you know, that is the right kind of mentorship you need. You need, you know, someone who, you know, like there's always this little voice as women that tells us, you know, perhaps we're not good enough, we're a hack, we're, you know, can't do this, but you just need to tone it down and just really like focus and stay focused, and, you know, things will follow. I think my dad was an amazing role model when it came to empowerment.
Anybody else want to add something? Okay, perfect. So we'll move on. Thank you, Maha, for sharing that. And Carola touched upon the fact that she said she didn't necessarily go into deanship because that was something she thought of, right? So it was we'll call it a happy and fortunate accident for us at the School of Continuing Studies. But I'm just wondering, and Annie also touched upon that consulting also came as a bit of a side, not necessarily what she had thought of going into. So I want to talk about your career trajectory. Did any of you, so I know for two of you it's not necessarily the case, but are you a leader by design, or because of certain circumstances, one leading to another? Or did you always feel like leading, whether it was leading people or projects or community initiatives or being the head of household or anything like that, was something you always wanted to do?
So maybe I'll take a first stab at that. I think it's a great question, but I would say I actually always saw myself as the first follower and not the leader. And there's some interesting work that's been done around leadership. Sonia probably knows it far better than I do, but that looks at the role of the follower, because you can have someone who carves a path and who is a leader in their field, but if nobody follows that person and nobody listens to that person, then are they really a leader? What makes them a leader? And it is so much about that interaction. And I would say in my case, it really was about, I was always I was a really good number two. And it allowed me, and I've been a number two and a number three in many different roles, but it allowed me to really look behind the scenes and see both the good and the bad and the ugly of leadership and say, okay, well, if I ever had the opportunity, what would I do? And I kind of moved from that role, which I was very happy with. I never actually sought out to be the number one anywhere. But I think because of the way in which I was internalizing being a follower, it over time positioned me and prepared me for greater leadership responsibility. And the reality is that your leaders are only as good as the people behind and around them in many cases, which is why I'm very fortunate here. But I think it's a matter of having the right staff, the right colleagues, the right superiors, who are all there as part of a network. And many of my colleagues here on this panel talked about being connectors. And that is exactly how I describe myself. But I would say you have to be able to be open and listen to many different voices and say there are nuggets, interesting nuggets in everything. And that's what ultimately then helped me find this path that I didn't choose. I don't want to take up too much time, but one story, when before I came here, I was dean somewhere else, and I used to run a program for young people coming to Washington, D.C. as part of that portfolio. And they would do an internship, and it was often their very first time away from home. And they're very young in some cases. And so I had someone come up to me and say, well, did you always want to be a dean? And I almost fell off my chair laughing. I said, if you had asked me when I was, 5 years old, I wouldn't even have known what a dean is or does, and let alone at age 20 or 25 or 30, I would have had no idea of what a dean does. So it's that openness to saying, okay, I don't know what this job is about, but if it is allowing me to use my talents and do something really interesting, why not? The worst that's going to happen is that I will fail miserably. Hopefully that hasn't happened yet, but you have to be willing to take that risk.
Thank you for sharing that. And we had a good follow-up question here from someone in the room. So Vince, thank you for being here. There are good leaders and bad leaders on our planet. Based on your experience, how do you manage competency with power?
Yeah, I saw that question. I might just jump in here because it ties into what Carola was saying, as well as what I was going to say in response to Rosalie's question. And I think throughout I think up until my master's degree, I saw myself as a follower and mostly as a listener. And I'm going to plug my mother in here. What I learned from my mother is she masters the art of listening. And it's funny because she currently lives with me. Like we brought her into our home right before COVID, which was perfect. So my siblings, I have a brother and two sisters, and they call her all the time. And so sometimes I go up in her space and I hear her on the phone, and she's such a great listener. Like I can hear her listening. And so I think I picked that up. So I think being a listener brought me to the point where I remember the exact moment where I started considering possibly leading was during my master's degree, where we would have, team meetings and so on. And people started listening to what I was saying. And I think it was because I listened to them, and they would incorporate my ideas. And I thought, oh, really? Like, you really think it's a great idea? And so that's when I thought, oh, okay. So when I talk, people listen. But I think it's because I listen when people talk. I try to at very, very consciously. And so to Vincenzo's question, I think it's about being a servant leader. So I think it's about honoring and serving those that work with you. So we all work together. So if you have competencies, doesn't matter what those are, the number one competency is to listen and to acknowledge others and recognize others. And that's where the power becomes shifted, I think, evenly. So I answered a multitude of questions.
And couldn't have said it better, Sonia. It was that I completely agree. And I think the power of a good leader is recognizing the strengths, not the weaknesses, but taking the strengths of everyone in their team and elevating that so that as one team, you're successful. That to me is the power of a true leader. So Sonia, very well said. Couldn't have said anything better.
This is where I'm shamelessly going to plug in skills that we acquire as women and as mothers. And it's the ability to empathize, share a vision, be cheerleaders, inspiring, and having compassion. Being a leader, it's really interesting to look at the definition of what a leader is, because the definition can vary from one person to the other. It has to do with your own bias as well. So you have to see, if you close your eyes and you try to think, who was a good leader to me, and what is my vision of a good leader versus a bad leader, and what kind of leader do I want to be, and see how you can work towards being that. I think a good leader, for me, my own personal definition, is someone who creates safety. It is a safe space. I've heard this TED talk about someone in the army that says that people in the army, they've got this safety system, they trust each other. So it's when you're creating that, it's not just about a title or power. It has nothing to do with title or power. It's your ability to create that atmosphere, like in that feeling of safety and trust.
Thank you, Maha. And before we get to Caitlin's question, I was just curious because Annie, you brought up being sometimes the only woman at the table. So stemming from that, I'm just curious what your experience as a woman in all of your industries. And I know that we have IT and consulting and teaching and deanship and in other roles that you play. If you could talk about the specific experience of being a woman in sometimes male-dominated industries, and what it's like, and what it's like to walk into that.
I can. So it depends, and it's changed over the years based on where we're at as a community, obviously now. And for me, based on my role, it's changed, and how I project as well, and what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not willing to accept. But what I've seen in the past and what's happened in the past multiple times is walking into a steering committee, a client steering committee, and being at the same level as the clients that are there, but being looked at and asked if I can take the minutes. So that has happened over and over and over again. And it's to be able to say, you do it, right? And I think that as much as we have a tendency of wanting to, you know, to say, if to please and say yes and do our jobs. And it's not because we're consultants at the end of the day that we have to say yes to everything our clients ask, right? But I think, you know, now I walk in, I don't even notice it anymore just because my head is somewhere else. So, and because of that, I felt that the attitude has changed. At the beginning, I used to walk in and notice, and then it's like, there was, you know, it was sensed or something. I don't know how to explain it well in English, I guess, but it's as if I was exuding that, you know, sense of not feeling I was at the same level, even though I was. And now I don't project that anymore. And so I don't even notice it. And I don't let myself notice it, is what I've realized. So a little tidbit.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm curious the first time that happened when someone said, can you take the minutes? Do you remember the first time and how you reacted the first time?
Absolutely. It was the CEO of the company. And I looked at him and I took out my paper, my notes, and then all of a sudden I started interacting and giving information. And he just turned around and we had met, right? Like, but he just couldn't compute. So I did that. I took the notes and everything just because I was so taken aback. And then after the meeting, he came up to me and he apologized because he realized that, you know, he had a bias, right? And he had assumed that because I came in, I was there with 2 colleagues who were male. So he just assumed. So yes, it's like if it was yesterday, and it was several years ago, but it's still imprinted in and the fact that I didn't say no in that first, you know, in that first meeting, I kind of regret it. And then after that, I adjusted my behavior. It still happened a few times, but I was able to adjust the behavior and make them adjust theirs, right?
I've had, you know, similar encounters, you know, being the only woman in the table, sometimes you're seen as the host, and as a host, it comes with serving water or making sure everybody's comfortable. And you just have to be able to pull the seat at the table for yourself and participate. You know, so many of us sit around the table, sometimes with seats retracted. Sometimes we don't open our mouth during meetings. You know, they have to hear our voices. So you just have to craft a spot for yourself. These things will happen. I've had a client once in the oil industry. When I was coming in, I looked younger. You know, I'm this petite woman. You know, I'm the technical person, but maybe it doesn't look like it. I'm the knowledgeable person, but maybe it didn't look like it. And as I was walking in, I hear someone say, "Oh no, Maha is a woman." And, you know, I had to smile and say, you know, maybe we should restart this introduction. And walked out of the room and back again and say, "Hi, I'm Maha, and I'm going to be the lead on this project. Nice to meet you." And, you know, laughed, like, you know, everybody laughed. It was uncomfortable at first, but everybody laughed and brushed it off. And the client was very happy with my performance at the end of the project. You know, like there's bias, you know, everywhere you look, you may even have your own bias. So these things happen, unfortunately, still, and may continue happening. But, you know, we're grooming a new generation. Gen Z is going to challenge us on every single aspect. So there's some hope for that generation.
Thanks, Maha. And I see Carola has her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to, I agree with everything that the preceding speakers said. I would add that one of the biggest challenges when you are the only woman in the room, or one of few women in the room, but particularly when you're the only woman in the room, is that when you say something that makes sense or is logical, it doesn't actually get validated until a male says the same thing. And you kind of you watch yourself and you have an out of body experience and you think, well, wait a minute, didn't I just say that exact same thing and nobody reacted? And yet all of a sudden, you know, Fred said something and it's great and let's do what Fred said. And then you're sort of in this position of saying, well, do I point out that I had said the same thing and then I sound whiny and nagging, or me too, or do we then, you know, go with the flow and say, great, somebody heard what I had to say and they're going, you know, imitation is the best flattery. Let's go with that. But that I would agree is a big challenge. I've also been in situations where I actually for a long time purposefully hired males as my assistants or more junior individuals. So one, to role model what it is like to have a woman who has authority or responsibility, but also because I was comfortable working in an environment with males and didn't really think about it too much. But then inevitably we would, if I were on a delegation or a meeting and go, particularly with ministries or political officials, inevitably they would go and speak to my assistant thinking that he was the lead or that he was the person that needed to be honored and would be put into you know, the honoring chair, particularly if you go to some cultures where women are not as visible or in positions where they can have that kind of voice. So you do have to assert yourself in a polite but very determined way and say, well, actually, that was my idea, or no, I'm the lead on this. So absolutely agree with what both Annie and Maya pointed out.
I imagine that resonates with a lot of people because that has happened to me. So I'm just curious if it's ever happened to you that you came up with an idea and then either the credit went to a male counterpart or a male counterpart said the same thing and then that was validated. Please say yes in the chat. I'm just so curious to see how many people that's happened to. Oh yeah, so here we go.
Yes.
So
yes,
obviously
yes.
that resonates. And I know I'm laughing. It's not that funny when it happens to you, and I understand the strange situation you're in of, well, yeah, do I point it out? But then that, what does, you know, what is the message that's sending? And I just want to say, Jane Reichman before said it's important to build your allies at work so that they raise the fact that the woman came up with the idea. So it's not only on the woman to do that. And I love that. And thank you for all your yeses. We see that loud and clear.
Is there any no? Just wanted to see here. It's not, but yeah, wow, floored by the answers. Floored by the answers. And I would just like to know, since you're all talking about this and I was hopeful that things were changing, I would like to know, so since these yes, did you see any major changes? Do you see like maybe things going uphill? So I know we're talking about the future generations, but have you seen like a significant change recently? And when was that?
Well, the future generation is not necessarily in upper leadership positions yet. So, you know, we are going to see a change. There's a lot more advocacy for rights, all types of rights. So we will see a change. However, I mean, the shift I've noticed is a little awkwardness in, you know, what comes out of the mouth of a male counterpart saying, oh, is this actually okay to say, oh, whoops, did I make you feel uncomfortable? You know, it's just a lot of awkwardness at times. Some people, I mean, sometimes you're surrounded by so many men, like you don't think about it anymore. You just brush it off. It's just a comment and you just ignore it. So that's not going to drive change. And if you do speak up, then you're bitter person and you're too assertive and you're too aggressive and, you know, nobody wants to work with you. So how do you strike as a female leader, like, or just a female in the workforce, how do you strike the right balance? I mean, it's a question to the audience. I mean, feel free to answer.
Yeah, I'd like to speak up actually. So I might be one of your no's. I mean, not one that I can vividly remember, right? That most of you are listing here. But I have been silenced. So nobody's taken my answer, but I have been silenced to the point where I felt like I didn't have my voice any longer. And that was an uphill battle for me. And so now to answer your question, currently I see a big change in the men around me, but only for one reason, because I stood up for myself. So I really had to dig deep and be brave and say, no, I have value and I can do amazing things. And people could see that, right? And then as a result, I do see there is a change. But if I just sat and went away, like part of me was like, oh, I don't need that. I'll go and do great things elsewhere. And that's what I really wanted to do. But I was encouraged, you know, by the people around me. And it's funny because that original conversation, I was speaking to another woman colleague of mine about that specific situation. And she says, I think it's because you're a woman. And I said, oh no, like I'm so naive. I thought there's no way, it's not because I'm a woman. But you know, who knows, maybe it is. But I think that what I learned to do and what I teach others to do, and I use a metaphor called the red dot. And I think Annie was talking about that subtly when she said she just doesn't quite notice it anymore and people just value her. So I think we all have a red dot. We own a red carpet or a dot that we stand on, like TEDx talks. And when we're on that dot, you know, we know who we are. We know our value. We know our worth. And that comes out. But sometimes we're not always standing so strong on our dot. And that gets felt. You know, the energy gets portrayed. And so now in that situation that I was talking about, I'm on my dot. I'm really strong. And so I'm actually a very different person than I was when I felt devalued, but I allowed that to happen. So that's, I don't know, that's just my experience. So I encourage all of you to stand strong on your dot, know your value, do the work, know you matter, and you need to have your voice.
I 100% agree. And I also think that even though there is, you know, the idea that it might come out too aggressive, too assertive, you know, there's a right balance. And, you know, as women here, we know the right balance. You know, we do it every day. You could deliver bad news with a big smile and really nicely, and people will take it. So just craft your space, make your space, and speak up like Sonia says.
I would also say is to the point that someone made earlier about allyship, it's also about not simply accepting the status quo and saying, okay, so I'm the only woman here, or I'm the only person of color, or I'm the only this or that in a group, or I don't see any role models. What I used to do in the organization that I ran that I talked about earlier, Women in International Security, we used to send what we called nasty grams to organizers of conferences like these or events where it was an all-male panel or an all-white panel, and we would send a list of names that they could have invited. Now, whether or not they knew them was irrelevant. It was simply saying, you know, great topic, you've put together such an interesting set of ideas, but surely you did not, you must just not have known about so-and-so who was doing this great work related to your topic. And so we took away the excuse of saying, well, I don't know anybody, I don't know how to find people, there aren't enough people in this pool, in this field, and just don't take no for an answer.
I love the nasty grams. I think that's great. And rather than just saying, well, why doesn't this panel have more representation, or why doesn't this conference have more representation? Here are the people. I mean, how powerful is that? Here's who you could have invited. I think that's amazing. We'll go back to some questions we had here. And Caitlin, thank you so much for being patient. Let me scroll back up here and bring your question. I know it was about advanced degrees. So all the panelists have graduate degrees. Do you feel that an advanced degree is a prerequisite for leadership opportunities? And is the lack of a master's or PhD a barrier to advancement in your particular field?
Well, I have to say, as dean of a higher education institution, that absolutely you should have a graduate degree, and you should get many of them and more of them. So, but I would say that it depends. It really depends on the field, and my colleagues on this panel who are in technology may in fact say it is, my sense is it may be less important, that we are going through a generational shift where that is no longer as necessary, and that we're not looking at, it's not just the degree, it's where did you get your degree from and with whom did you get your degree, right? There's a whole package that comes with that credential that is more than just the credential on a piece of paper. I do think that having advanced education opens up more opportunities. It gives you choices. And the reason that I went back actually after a divorce, and I had a choice of getting a sports car with my alimony or going back to graduate school, and I made the mistake of going back to graduate school. Far less fun, far less entertaining. I would not recommend it as a choice of testing your freedom, but it did in fact give me opportunities simply because I was working in a field where, had I not had the PhD, I would have always been written off automatically. It was just, I needed that ticket as the gateway, as the entry into a space that didn't actually require a PhD when I was working for foundations, for example. But if you wanted to talk to other people who had those degrees, it helped.
Yeah, so I love, Carola, your answer. I do agree that my master's degree has opened up lots of doors, and I just would not be doing what I'm doing today without it. That being said, I have applied for PhD twice and got rejected twice. And I said to myself, that's not going to stop me from doing what I want to do. So I did continue, and I'm actually really enjoying the research that I'm doing on my own through grants. It is a bit harder, but I am still achieving the things I wanted to achieve without the PhD. So whether I'll get one or not is unknown, but I've definitely put it off the to-do list because I'm actually doing it. So I think the question is, what do you want to do? To Carola's point, it depends. So what do you want to do? And based on where you see yourself and your purpose in the world, just go do it. And along the way, you'll see if you actually need the degree or not. And we know lots of people who have no degrees who are doing amazing things in the world. So I think it depends on where you want to put your time and how you want to use your gifts.
Yeah, not having a master's or a PhD does not make you not a leader. Like, you can be a leader, like, with a bachelor's. I consider my mother a leader, but she is not, she's not university educated, but I see her leading in every single area of her life, and, taking on a court by storm and doing things that are extremely empowering. If that is not leadership, what would you call that? I want you, like the person who asked this question, I want you to also remember that there aren't just masters and PhDs, there's certificates. You know, we are in an economy where it's extremely important from an HR perspective, it's extremely important to skill up. You're going to hear this term a lot. So it's a skills economy. So there's a lot of certifications out there that are much shorter, much more attainable. And, you know, we have great universities here in Montreal, and there's great universities online today. And, you know, look at those certifications that can really give you the cutting edge, in my personal opinion. I've dedicated like 2-3 years where I was just looking at what we call contingent labor. And it's basically, you know, consultants like me who get hired in a company. I'm a contingent labor. I get no benefits from the company. I get paid, you know, like on an hourly basis. However, I'm really sought after due to my skills. So that is contingent labor. So look up skills economy, look at certifications that may help you get to the next step if higher education is something you want to pursue.
I would add one, sorry, I would want to add one caveat or warning to that. And this is, I've encountered now a number of individuals who spent a lot of money on certificates and ended up either not knowing how to leverage those certificates, or it turned out not to be the right thing, or it was very duplicative of things that they already knew. And so I would just add, you know, make sure that you do your homework, that it's a reputable organization that is providing you with the certificate, and that you really understand what is actually being taught, because it may turn out that you already know a lot of those things. And so it might be that you don't even want to do a certificate, but just take a course here or there to fill in the gaps. But I would just say do your homework before you put down lots of money for something.
Thanks for that. I hope that answers your question. We have another question that came to me directly, and it's from Andrea. She wants to know, have you experienced how you experience and manage work relationships with other women in leadership, managers, or coworkers who are maybe on the same path or trajectory of you and that have the same goal?
Oh, so many. So many at Accenture. There's obviously an immense amount of focus on inclusion and diversity. And I'm proud to say that 60% of my SAP practice leadership team are women. So at the end of the day, and I mean, we've announced, you know, very publicly as a firm that we're aiming for 50-50 across all levels. I think that how we manage it, and I don't want to speak for the other market units, or sorry, the other regions for my work, but in Canada, we really, really work as a team. There's not a competition between us. We hold each other accountable for each other's success. And I think we all learn from each other. And I'm not saying this is not a sales pitch, right? This is really us holding hands and understanding that we have a major role from a gender diversity and all other diversities. We're holding hands and we're doing what we need to do so that the generations behind us get to live through something easier than what we have lived, and people before us obviously was even harder. So there is this underlying alignment within my colleagues and coworkers. And last night, I'll give you something, and I'll be quite transparent. We have different levels in partnerships at Accenture. They're not partnerships. We're not a partner organization, but I'll call it that for now. We have different levels. And one of the people in my team got promoted to the next level. So technically she's more senior than me, because you know, she's been up for a while. And when the leadership came to me and said, listen, you know, what do you think? And I said, no. She needs to go before me. And then I'm my advocate now for my December promotion, you know, and that's just the way it is. And it's the way it needs to be. So we're holding hands and we've got that alignment and we have that target to, you know, progress together to make a difference.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I love women supporting women, you know, and I love, Annie, that you have that one person or maybe multiple women in there who are, you know, supporting you, and it provides mentorship, it provides an alliance, you have an ally internally. So, you know, that does happen at times. I love actually like working with new grads and, you know, helping people starting their careers, you know, just keep on going up and grooming and skilling up. So I love supporting women primarily. I mean, I love supporting people coming into a new career too, but I love that you have that experience, Annie.
Yes, it's wonderful to hear, especially from such a large organization. I was just curious, is this recent or does this go back a long time in terms of
So we had our CEO for Canada was a huge inclusion and diversity advocate. And he retired. Our CEO of Canada, our CEO of Accenture globally, who passed away, was a huge advocate for inclusion and diversity. So we've seen the Accenture I'm at today versus 15 years ago, completely different. The last 5 years, I've seen the evolution. Our new CEO is a woman. And so my boss, who leads the largest practice in Canada, is a woman. And so we have been, the culture has been really to, you know, support each other and to really, in all of the discussions internally, and we're working hard with our clients so that they are at the level we are from an inclusion and diversity perspective, that every single conversation we have internally, we have a mental health and bias lead on every conversation, and that they are responsible and accountable. If they hear any type of bias, they have to unmute and they have to publicly say that was a bias. We need to rephrase. Yes. And so, because if you don't do these things that are quite drastic and in your face, things are not going to change. And the other thing that we're doing is we are making our clients more and more accountable to these ways of working. And we are putting together these programs internally, and we're inviting some of our key large clients to join us and to be part of pilot programs, because this is not an Accenture issue. This is not a McGill issue. This is an issue everywhere, and we need to bring people together to have the same mindset and to have the same reflexes. And so we have a leadership team who believes in the strength of having a diverse and inclusive population. And so we're bringing these programs to our clients, we're piloting these, and then we're hoping to bring it across the board. Now, does bias and you know, non-inclusion and non-diversity actions still happen? Heck yeah. And it's our role and our positions that we have as leaders to say, no, it stops there.
You know, so many people have said, wow, and they're thrilled and that, and, you know, this makes me happy and this sort of thing. And I have to say, this makes me happy. And I'm sure I share the sentiment with other people here, not only because of how incredible that is, how I love how you say it's muting someone and tell it, that's amazing. And I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. I didn't know this actually happened. But more than that, what's wonderful, when we had our conversation before on EDI issues, we talk about how slow these movements are, how a culture shift takes years. And so it's nice to hear that even in the last 5 years that you have seen such big change. So I think that's hopeful for a lot of people. And Carol, I think you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one of the points that Annie is making that we really can't underestimate enough is advocacy from the top. Because you have to own it. And I would say that is a responsibility of leadership. And we see it particularly in the movements that now exist both in Canada and in the US around women on boards. There are a number of organizations that are trying to diversify boards of governors, boards of directors, and making sure that they have both gender diversity, but also other equity-seeking representation. Because if the board and the decision-making individuals, whether it is the team leaders, if it's at a university, we look very closely at. I'm middle management at a university, and but I look to my senior colleagues. I look to my leadership to say, okay, what are we doing from the top? And I see Leah Moss on the session there. Hi, Leah, good to see you. But she works with a dean who has been, I think, a great advocate for diversity within the university. And it's this is a someone that one would describe potentially as a white male of a certain age, who has done amazing work in promoting women and advocating for advancement. I'm trying to do the same thing. We have others who are doing the same thing, but it's so important to what Annie said, that if it's not coming from the leadership, if you don't have that that advocacy and the willingness to take, maybe even take the heat that things might not work as efficiently or as smoothly, or they might take a little bit longer because you are insisting on that diversity, it won't happen at all, and you won't get to those culture shifts.
Thank you, Carolina. You mentioned it coming from the top, and you also talk about men who obviously take efforts or make conscious efforts to have these things moving, and Annie talked about that as well. And Nayo, who is with us, works with 5 women and is probably a bigger feminist than all of us. And I mean that with with admiration. And actually that brings me to, there are a few men in the panel, and Greg has a comment. Greg, would you like to speak up, or would you like me to read it? I welcome you to talk if you'd like. Okay, so I'll read it for Greg. So as one of very few men attending this panel discussion, I'm very conscious of the struggles women continue to endure in 2021. As a father of 2 young adult daughters, 20 and 24, no boys, I'm hopeful for their future because of strong women leaders like yourselves and other women that I'm privileged to know who continue to pave the road ahead for my daughters and other young women. I have on occasion called out other men who've engaged in misogynistic behaviors in professional and social settings, but I'm embarrassed to admit that sometimes I've not. I will strive to do better. My question for the panelists is this: are you seeing more examples at work and in your social lives where men are more frequently sticking up to advocate for their female colleagues and friends? And thank you for that question, Greg. What a great question and a great segue into what Carola was actually talking about. Thank you for that.
I'll go. My previous boss has sisters and was a huge advocate for women and just making sure that credit is taken when needed. Women, the best thing you can do for your daughters is to teach them how to use their voice and have, know they have self-worth and know that they can do whatever they set their minds to do. So it's, it's in looking at how we raise boys versus girls, and, and what words we use, because those can shape, the person's personality and what they can do. Like, women are just as good as men, but they have to believe it. So I've seen a lot of men who are advocates for women. Some speak up, some don't. But most of all, a lot of the men, you know, at my work are very supportive. You know, I work in HR systems. So there are women and there's men. There's a culture of respect, you know, there is, you know, there's a culture of equality. And there's a lot of men who believe that some women, some of us are able to do the job better than them. So it is better for them to be surrounded by women who are completely capable. You want something to get done? Hire women, you know, we're great. We can do it all. But really just make sure that you teach your daughters to know their self-worth.
Thank you, Maha. We were going to switch gears at some point and take the conversation away from personal experiences and larger issues. We'll do that with this question, but I know that people are very interested in your experience because, of course, that's what they're here to learn. But I'm just curious with the pandemic, and it's I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the pandemic at some point, because this is about transformation and getting, you know, the future past the pandemic, which unfortunately is not the case yet. But I'm just wondering, as you all know, women have had more issues with everything in terms of violence, losing their jobs, issues with their careers. So there's so many things that they've been affected more negatively than men, and we're not even talking about cross-sectionality. So that include, you know, if they are women of color, or if their socioeconomic status is lower. So can you talk about, with these really seem like we have taken steps backwards. Can you panelists talk about, do they think that these steps backwards are permanent? And what do they see as a result of these issues that have surfaced during the pandemic?
I don't want to be the only person to speak, but I'll go if no one goes. I think that there's really deep impacts. There's a lot of women who have left the workforce. Women, in case you haven't heard this term, but women do a lot of invisible labor. So even if the woman is the breadwinner, she is still the main caregiver. So when kids are sent home, she's also the teacher. So if we're doing like Zoom classes, she's the teacher too. So we're just juggling different things at the same time. We're great at it, but you know, those of us who don't suffer a burnout, you know, continue going. But a lot of us, you know, have to weigh pros and cons of, you know, what does it mean to stay in the workforce versus, you know, taking a break and being the main caregiver. There's a lot of women. I have some stats somewhere. I'll pull them out if somebody has some other ideas or an answer to this question. But in HR, we know that this is going to have a long-term effect, and we need to be proactive in bringing more women back to the workforce. I like to use the term of underemployment. I'm going to shamelessly plug again, you know, to hire moms. You know, that is an, you know, a group of individuals who are highly skilled who are underemployed. I'm also a disability advocate, so I'll shamelessly plug that people who are disabled are also underemployed. So if we're going to, you know, look at the idea of underemployment and reskilling and people re-entering the workforce, this means that in order for women to re-enter the workforce, that we need to have programs in place for gradual reintroduction into work. So we're talking here about HR policies and benefits, you know, so for that to happen, change needs to happen.
I would also add that, and I completely agree with you, Maha. I think all of those things make a huge difference, and the data show that women have taken the disproportionate hit in almost every single industry and field that we know of. The challenge, or what's interesting about this time, is that we are seeing, you know, it's not just the pandemic, right? We've had political upheavals. We've had disenfranchisement of individuals. we have had really fundamental disruptions of the way in which certain industries work. And part of the challenge that we have now is we need to actually reassess everything. So it's not just bringing women back into the old job. We have to bring women and other individuals. If we look at, what are we doing to advance Indigenous members of our communities? What are we doing to advance Black Canadians, for example, or Latinx individuals, or queer individuals? The challenge is if we simply plug them into a job that was the old job, that's not enough. We actually need to redesign the work that is being done. So I would say to Maha, it's both hire these individuals, but also rethink what we do about the workplace to allow individuals who may not have felt that they were actually being given a fair chance to succeed and advance. And I'm being very abstract, but there are, I think, we can point to some very specific examples where, the automation that has accelerated as a result of the pandemic could theoretically just eliminate a whole bunch of jobs. On the other hand, we see that there are all kinds of new opportunities coming up with the advent of AI, with the advent of new technologies, with the need for us to learn and teach online, all kinds of things that we hadn't really thought about. In the health space, there's a huge amount of opportunity, I think, for new ways of thinking about healthcare and health delivery. But we now have to go through a phase of catching up. How do we catch up to the reality with the right skill sets and the right employment opportunities?
And Sonia, do you have any, and you feel you don't have to, of course, comment on this, but if you have
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I think we've been reactive in the last year and a half, right? And we're, I think I saw on LinkedIn once, like, what made you go through your digital transformation? The pandemic, right? But things have changed so much so quickly in 18 months because of the pandemic, because of exactly what Carola has been saying, all these different outcomes of different events. And now we're in the stage where we need to revamp our way of working to be able to become, more inclusive, yet again, for all of these individuals who have been impacted, because right now we're just like a train plowing through. Anyway, that's, how I believe most of us feel these days. And we need to put a lot of effort and thought and strategic thinking around how we need to change our ways of working and how all of this has impacted the workforce and reintegrating these individuals. So I completely agree with Maha and with Carola to say this is a long-term impact, because to change this massive boat that is, or massive train that's just plowing will take time, but it takes time and takes the effort of people thinking through how do we, upskill individuals, change the skills, create new jobs, new ways of thinking to reintegrate these individuals.
I totally agree. And as a certified reinvention practitioner, we have a saying, let's not let a good crisis go to waste. So, we've seen, especially in education, it's changed a lot in a year and a half. It's not recognizable. And so I think that we're having these wonderful opportunities. I'm also very conscious of the fact that a lot of people, but mostly the women I speak to, are just working around the clock. To Maha's point, with the kids and working, and then, it's round the clock, and people are just exhausted. I've also read a bunch of articles around the mass exodus, people just quitting their jobs, right? And saying, you know, I've got to change the way I do things. So the word that I like to use is reinvention. It is a very important skill set with regards to what it is, when to reinvent, and how to reinvent. And it's something that I study on a daily basis. I've got a beautiful community. So if anybody's interested to look into Reinvention Society on Facebook, it is really an amazing opportunity with lots of information. And there's a lab that's happening in August as well that you can sign up for free. And I'm a member just like anybody else. So it's a plug, but I highly recommend it. It has changed my life. When the pandemic hit, I also had no work and had to reinvent myself. And it has been one of my most successful years to date. So it is possible for women and everybody, really, I think, to be able to acquire these skills that is to be adaptable, right? To sort of see things coming before they come, and to be ready for those and put ourselves in positions of power.
And to add on to what Sonia said, I mean, you have to also remember that there's a lot of women who have started businesses this year. There's a lot of people who have started, like, so in the effort of, you know, like the essence is reinvention, like what's next for me. Like there's some amazing ideas. I have a couple of friends who are in the coaching and wellness industry, and their businesses are thriving. You know, they actually couldn't have started such a successful business if it was not a recession and a pandemic year.
Thank you.
So it's possible.
Thank you for bringing that. I was actually going to bring one of our keynote speakers, Deborah, who specializes in women entrepreneurship, brought that almost twice as many women do start a successful business. And I was wondering if maybe that was affected by what Carola was saying about the system. You were talking about the HR policies and the need for change. So would you think that this is kind of a solution or kind of a trend that is going because of these barriers or these complications, let's say?
Opportunities?
Opportunities. I prefer the word. Yeah. Okay.
I think yes, it probably is, but I also I worry about that because we have privileged entrepreneurship in a way that also it exposes individuals to a far greater degree of risk and vulnerability. And yes, there are great opportunities, and I have several family members who couldn't imagine my life of working for a boss and thinking, oh my God, how awful. And you know, I need to be my own person and I set my own rules. And yet they then go through long spells where their income is unstable, or they have to worry about where is the next paycheck coming from. To Maha and Ani's point of I'm not a parent, I'm an aunt, very proud of that, but you know, the idea that you would be there as a single parent, suddenly having to manage not just a startup business, but all the risks that come from not being able to guarantee health insurance or guarantee pension, or the fact that we live to, you know, people who are going to live to be 150 already are born. Think about how will entrepreneurial enterprises sustain us through that longevity of life. I don't know, maybe it will, but I would, you know, and maybe I'm belying my social democratic background, but I would caution against throwing everything into the entrepreneurial basket and saying, well, here, you know, let's privatize, let's have everything be supported by individual entrepreneurship. That's great. But you can be an entrepreneur even within an organization. And so maybe it's more about that entrepreneurial mindset without saying we're kicking everybody out of the existing economic structure and sending you off to fend for yourself.
I completely agree, Carola. I think that the concept of entrepreneurship it's not for everyone, right? And that's totally okay. And again, it comes to companies and organizations like ours to, you know, raise the bar and take on the accountability to make that switch and mindset and to focus on how to bring these individuals back into the workforce. So completely agree.
So I guess giving a little bit more freedom and everything would definitely support, and yeah, giving more space for those strong leaders.
I'm conscious of two things. One is Nayo, I completely apologize. I monopolized this conversation, meaning this facilitation. I sincerely apologize because I'm so passionate about this topic. I'm so passionate. I'm actually in awe of all of these speakers. So my apologies to you,
No
Nayo.
worries. I had a lot of fun. I feel I was talking too much at the beginning, so I sit back, relax. There also my cat would jump in, but everything went well.
Thank you. And I'm also conscious of the time. It is 5:32. And I know that these are four extremely busy women. And I can't thank you enough for being here, panelists, to all of you, Annie, Sonia, Maha, and Carola. Our sincere thanks and our gratitude, especially for being so open. I know you talked about things that are potentially exposing, and I would really appreciate that. Also, some of the conversations we had today on reinvention, for example, tonight at 7 p.m., there's actually the art of reinvention as one of the power skills sessions. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. We have someone talking about the need to change the curricula in higher education so that it's more inclusive, something else that came out today. So lots of power skills sessions yet to come that deal with some of the issues that came up in here. And Jane Reichman tomorrow, also she's here, and tomorrow she's leading a session on how to move from manager to coach, which anybody who manages people, I highly recommend. Having been privy to the PowerPoint presentation and knowing her, I know it will be a fantastic session as well. Thank you all of you for participating, for your comments and engagement in the chat. Josie, nice to see you, another friend. So Josie, Annie, and I worked together in our first jobs, and we survived. It was quite a place to
Hi, Josie.
So I think, you know, sometimes you're bound together by abuse is probably too strong, but by a tough situation.
Maybe not that strong.
Exactly, but so it's nice to see you, Josie. Adversity, thank you, Carola. Adversity, a much better word, much more apropos. So thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Panelists, as you can see in the chat, you're receiving lots of love and admiration. And I'm really grateful for this conversation, and I wish it could go on longer, but I know you have better things to do than hang around with us, and you've probably worked all day and we're getting up early tomorrow. Thank you, Jane, for putting the link of your session in the chat. Like I said, highly recommend it. Thank you to one and all. And I look forward to seeing at other sessions and Power Skills for the next couple of days. Bye-bye.
Cool.